Hi, how you doing? This is Ben Fisher. I'm with the hostingnews.com, and I'm here at HostingCon 2014. And we're here today talking with Hillary Stiff from Chevelle Capital. How are you doing, Hillary?
Hi, Ben. It's great to see you.
Definitely great to see you. You and I have been around the industry for a long time, but your story really hasn't been told. And you haven't been able to really get to talk to people who are up and coming in the industry. So what we've got for you today is we've got a little bit of background on Chevelle Capital and a little bit of kind of a something that we're just calling kind of like running your company as if. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's first, Hillary, let's get started with some background. How did you get into the industry? I think you started back in '97 actually with Vario, right? So how did you kind of grow from there into the hosting industry where you are now, where you've completed over 250 transactions just to date in the hosting or hosting related industry? Give us the scoop.
Well, first of all, Ben, I think you may have called me a dinosaur of the hosting industry, but that's probably accurate. As you mentioned, we got started in 1997 with Vario. We were helping them on their East Coast ISP acquisitions. From that, it really morphed into doing essentially shared hosting at that time. They really weren't dedicated hosters. And we worked for Vario for probably about 4 or 5 years, doing consolidation of hosting, ending with a 1999 acquisition of Digital Nation, which was a high watermark in the industry at that point. Went for $100 million, and at that point it had about $10 million of revenue. So that's approximately, depending on how you evaluate it, about a 10 to 12 times revenue multiple. So things have certainly changed in the last 10 years.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we don't see those every day now.
No. So once we finished helping them on their buy side deals, we started working for Endurance. And we helped them complete, I don't know, somewhere probably just south of 20 acquisitions. And it was interesting as we worked for companies working on buy side programs. A lot of times they're private equity backed. What would happen is we'd find all these companies that were wonderful companies that didn't fit the specific requirements of the group that we were working for. And probably about 10 years ago, I think it was around the time of the first HostingCon in Chicago, we came up with the idea, why don't we take all these individual companies that we're seeing that aren't a fit for our particular buyer, why don't we put them on a list and we'll send them out? And as I said, that was 10 years ago. And since that point, I think we've now done about 260 hosting deals in the last too many years to count.
260 transactions. That is just a lot of. That's a lot of hosting accounts. That's a lot of capital out there. I think we all know the Cowboys. That were up there that started coming up in the '90s. Coming out of their basically out of their dorm room closets and then pumping money into AdWords and just getting a bunch of customers, and then all of a sudden they're sitting there in your office saying, "So, am I going to be rich now?" And but before we get into that kind of story, into that story of yeah of hosts, um, what is your take on the industry? Being that you've been doing this for in excess of 10 years, what is your take on the industry then and now?
I think we love the people in the industry. And as you mentioned, it's very interesting because I can't think of another industry where you have so many people that started with an unorthodox business background. They weren't in a management program. They didn't start off as a salesperson for a company. A lot of them, as you mentioned, out of their dorm room or maybe sometimes even their basement, had a love for computers and they created a business out of that. And as we said, some of those businesses have grown up to be 40, $50 million companies. Um, so it's been tremendous to work with these people, these young entrepreneurs with so much energy. And I think probably the major difference that we've seen is maturation of the industry during that time period. You know, in the go-go days when it first started, I mean, you didn't even, I was going to say only had to answer the phone to grow, but a lot of them didn't even have a phone. So you only had to answer email. And as the industry has matured, we've certainly seen changes. Um, at this point, I think one of the things that we've seen that's happening that's a pretty dramatic change is it used to be as you'd have new entrants coming into the market, they'd start off with the registration of their domain. And at one point, those initial points were not particularly good at offering hosting products and services and the support of keeping those customers. They did domain very well, but that was about it. So that I'd consider that kind of the spigot of new customers going into the industry. And what you'd see would happen is they'd register their domain and then they'd go on and find hosting. But now, over the last couple of years, with Weebly and Wix and Web.com and GoDaddy, they've really launched tremendous products and support for these customers and are paying a lot of attention to them. So those new customers we see are starting with the registration or the free website, but because they're being treated so well, they don't churn from there, so they stay there. So it's a little concerning. Unfortunately, the rest of the industry sometimes is trading the same customers back and forth, which isn't that productive. So that's a change that certainly made it much more difficult for a lot of the hosters out there. And while we were used to seeing those kind of hockey stick revenue jumps, now unfortunately, flat is kind of the new growth or the old growth, however you want to.
Hey, flat is the new in.
There you go. Yeah, and we're telling people a lot of times, you can run a good company now and still have flat revenues, and it's just we're in a different industry, not a different industry, we're in a different market than we used to.
Right. The marketplace has changed. I mean, we had huge accelerated growth basically over the past 10 years. There's no way that's sustainable. There's just not enough people to buy the services, really. Like, I think is what it comes down to. Like you said, they're more kind of like swapping back and forth. And then you've got the big brands, of course, that own like multiple brands, and they're just swapping back and forth between their own properties. So actually, that's got to be kind of interesting to see that on the background. But so, let's talk about really quick, like, yo,
Sorry, if I could just add one thing. But remember, it's still an attractive business. I mean, just because it doesn't have the characteristics that it used to have 10 or 12 years ago, but the cash flow from these businesses are tremendous, and the opportunities to continue to sell them additional products to customers to help solve issues and help them grow and do their, whatever, if they're selling pocketbooks or if it's a restaurant or if it's a hotel, there's still tremendous ways that you can help that customer, and it's still a good business. The cash flow is tremendous. It's just a bit of a different, it has different characteristics than it once did.
yeah, I'm totally agree, 100%. Um, so let's talk a little bit about. Well, actually, before we get into how to not make a deal go wrong, um, what was your most amazing deal?
Oh, that is a difficult one. You know, I think probably it's not necessarily the one with the biggest purchase price. I think when you see somebody who's really developed something special and they've put their blood, sweat, and tears into that and created a very attractive company, and then eventually see them be able to exit and be rewarded for the good work. And we've had a number of those, and we've seen people be very wet behind the ears on the whole thing and figure it out and do something quite different and have a tremendous success. I think those are the best things.
And we've kind of been talking about the Cowboys, right? And the dorm rooms and the basements. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier was about how going through the whole buy sell experience is actually a very educational experience for somebody who may not have a lot of business acumen in the first place. And now you come from a CFO background, so you're kind of schooling people as basically kind of like, hey, by the way, you need to track your customer growth, or how much you're spending on marketing. What's your ARPU? What's your EBITDA? Um, so let's talk a little bit about that, about the whole learning experience, that people go through.
You're going to make me jump on my soapbox. This is something I feel religious about or passionate about. And I think we've said from the very beginning that some people view the concept of metrics and understanding their business as something they do when they want to sell. It's something you need to do to run your business. You can't make educated decisions about buying servers, marketing programs and spend, even additional employees and a geographic expansion, unless you truly understand both the potential projected revenue impact from that, but also the cost. And it's one thing to do that initial work, but you need to track it. And it doesn't need to be anything particularly sophisticated or fancy. An Excel spreadsheet is just fine. You can do very rudimentary items, but just to make sure that you're making the best decisions for your company, but based on facts, not based on what your intuition is telling you, because there's all these truisms that we always hear in this space, and a lot of people believe in them. But it's interesting, every once in a while somebody actually runs the numbers and finds out that it's not true. And I could bring these up and I would probably be stoned because everybody believes them, but I certainly have fallen uh, victim to them. There's a concept of free website hosting, and everybody thinks, well, if we try to convert them, even if we dramatically underemphasize this or whatever, we're still going to get 15% or whatever. But there's lots of people who've done it, and they really don't convert any, and that's just shocking. The other concept is, on some bases, they always believe that it's their customers and they can cross sell up the stack. It makes total sense. You would believe it also. But sometimes when you evaluate it, they realize that the customers really don't, which is totally counterintuitive. And I'm just bringing those things up because it shows you need to test some of your beliefs to make sure that's actually what's happening. I know it makes sense that it'd be happening, but sometimes you may find out that it's not.
Well, I mean, you mentioned two things there. Number one is the free hosting model, right, which was very popular with some very large brands that have been sold, and really helped them build their hosting business. But the other thing that you said there too was the aspect of upselling on the stack, right? What was the 2009, 10, or something like that was when a lot of these ISVs started coming into the marketplace. HostingCon back then, the advisory board, we were saying, okay, it's like change or die, basically. So you need to upsell, your customer base, but there was no real mechanisms in place at that point to even be able to say, well, this customer ended up buying this piece of software. Yeah, so it was, you're right, it was 100%. It was like a guesstimate. Like, yeah, it's, 30 out of 100.
No,
So, how do you deal with that? Or, I mean, has that killed deals for you?
I don't think it is killed deals. In fact, I think sometimes there got to be a feeling that if you weren't migrating up the stack, you weren't worthy in some ways. But I think the goal of everybody needs to be to do the best job serving their customers. And whether you're selling high-end managed complex solutions or you're selling share, there's still a lot that can be done with that base. And this is interesting and maybe a little bit of a non sequitur, but we always get asked questions about what we should do to prepare to sell. And there are a number of things that you can do to prepare to sell. But specifically, what the question is, should I lease this equipment? Should I start selling this product? And you really need to run your business as you said earlier, as if you were going to continue to run and own it, because there's so many different buyers and sellers out there. You can't paint yourself for one particular buyer. You don't know who's going to be in the market and when they're going to be in the market. So I think that question of, you know, does that change things because you can't go up the stack? No, there's a ton of people that want to buy simple shared hosting and also a ton that want to buy colo. So you can have a great business at any space or segment.